10 years ago, Sarah Mitchell made a decision that most people called crazy. She gave her kidney to a complete stranger. No connection, no family tie, just a woman who saw someone dying and decided to do something about it. People asked her why. Friends called her reckless. Her own mother cried, begging her to reconsider. But Sarah had always believed that if you have the power to save a life and you don't, you're choosing to let someone die. So she did it. The surgery happened, the stranger lived, and Sarah went back to her quiet life as a high school art teacher in Portland, Oregon, never expecting to hear from him again. But 10 years later, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, a man in his 60s stood there with tears streaming down his face and a briefcase in his hand. What was inside that briefcase, and what this stranger had spent an entire decade doing, would change Sarah's life in ways she never saw coming. Let's go back to where this story really begins. Sarah was 32 years old, single, living in a small apartment with her cat, teaching art to teenagers who mostly didn't care about art. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't particularly remarkable. She was just someone trying to make a difference in small ways, teaching kids to see beauty in the world, to express themselves, to believe they mattered. Her own life had been hard. She'd lost her father to cancer when she was 19. Watched him waste away in a hospital bed, watched her mother sell everything they owned to pay for treatments that didn't work, watched the medical bills bury them so deep they lost their house. Sarah had to drop out of college, work 3 jobs, help her mother rebuild. It took years. And somewhere in all that pain, Sarah made a promise to herself. If she ever had the chance to help someone else avoid that kind of suffering, she would. No matter what it cost her. So when she saw a story on the local news about a man named Daniel Chen who was dying of kidney failure, waiting on a transplant list that was years long, something in Sarah just knew. She called the hospital that same night. The nurses thought she was joking at first. People don't just volunteer to give organs to strangers. There are programs, sure, but they're rare. The screening process is intense. Psychological evaluations, medical tests, interviews to make sure you're not being coerced or doing it for the wrong reasons. Sarah went through all of it. 6 months of testing. And every time someone asked her why, she gave the same answer. Because I can. Because he's dying. Because if I don't, who will? Daniel Chen was 53 years old, a widower who'd lost his wife to breast cancer 3 years earlier. He was a bookkeeper, a quiet man who'd worked for the same small accounting firm for 30 years. No children. No siblings. His parents were gone. He was alone in the world, and his body was failing him. When the hospital told him they'd found a living donor, someone who didn't know him but wanted to save his life anyway, he couldn't believe it. He asked to meet her before the surgery. The hospital arranged it. Sarah still remembered that meeting. Daniel had been so thin, so frail. His skin had a yellowish tint from the toxins his failing kidneys couldn't filter. But his eyes were kind. He'd held her hand and asked her one question. "Why are you doing this for me?" And Sarah had smiled and said, "Because you deserve to live." That was all. No grand speech. No philosophy. Just the simple truth that this man's life had value, and she had the power to preserve it. The surgery happened on a cold January morning. 8 hours in the operating room. When Sarah woke up, the first thing the nurse told her was that Daniel's body had accepted the kidney immediately. He was going to live. Sarah remembered crying, not from pain, but from relief. She'd done it. She'd actually saved someone's life. The recovery was hard. Weeks of pain, months of rebuilding her strength. Her mother helped her through it, though she never fully understood why Sarah had taken the risk. Daniel sent her letters during her recovery. Beautiful, handwritten letters thanking her, telling her about the things he was looking forward to now that he had a future. He wanted to travel. He wanted to write a book. He wanted to learn to paint. He said Sarah had given him a second chance at life, and he wasn't going to waste it. After a few months, the letters stopped. Sarah understood. Daniel was living his life, and that's what she wanted for him. She went back to teaching, back to her routines. Sometimes she'd wonder how he was doing, if he'd made it to all those places he wanted to see, if he was happy. But she never reached out. That hadn't been the point. She didn't save him for gratitude or recognition. She saved him because it was the right thing to do. Life moved on. Sarah dated a few people, nothing serious. She got a promotion at school, started running the art department. She adopted another cat. She traveled a little, visited her mother in Arizona, went to a friend's wedding in California. Normal life. Unremarkable life. She thought about Daniel sometimes, usually on the anniversary of the surgery, but he'd become more of a memory than a real person. A good thing she'd done once, a long time ago. Until that Tuesday morning, 10 years later. Sarah had been grading student projects, drinking coffee in her kitchen, still in her pajamas because it was summer break and she had nowhere to be. The knock on her door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she looked through the peephole and saw an older man she didn't recognize, her first instinct was not to answer. But something about his face, the way he was crying, made her open the door with the chain still on. The man looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Sarah? Sarah Mitchell?" She confirmed it cautiously, wondering if this was some kind of scam. The man's legs seemed to give out, and he leaned against her doorframe. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Daniel Chin. You saved my life 10 years ago." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. She fumbled with the chain, opened the door fully, and just stared at him. He looked so different. Healthy. His skin had color, his frame had filled out, his eyes were bright. He was holding a briefcase tightly against his chest. "I've been looking for you," he said. "For 3 years, I've been looking for you. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I need to show you something. Can I please come in?" She let him in, her mind spinning. They sat in her small living room, and Daniel couldn't stop crying. He kept apologizing for showing up unannounced, for tracking her down, but he said he had to. He had to find her. Sarah made him tea, gave him time to collect himself, and finally asked the question that was burning in her mind. "Daniel, what's going on? Why were you looking for me?" Daniel set the briefcase on her coffee table but didn't open it yet. He needed to tell her the story first. After the transplant, after he recovered, Daniel had done exactly what he'd written in those letters. He traveled. He went to Europe, Asia, South America. He saw things he'd only dreamed of. He learned to paint badly, but he loved it. He wrote that book, a memoir about loss and second chances. It was self-published, didn't sell many copies, but it didn't matter. He was living. Really living. And every single day, he thought about Sarah, the stranger who'd given him all of this. But about 7 years after the transplant, something happened that changed everything. Daniel was in Peru, visiting Machu Picchu, when he met an American woman named Elena. She was a doctor, volunteering at a rural clinic. They started talking, and eventually, Daniel told her his story. About Sarah, about the kidney, about how a stranger's generosity had given him this second life. Elena was moved by the story, but then she said something that would haunt Daniel. She said, living kidney donors often face complications later in life. High blood pressure, reduced kidney function as they age, increased medical costs. People who donate don't always realize they're taking on a long-term risk. Has your donor been okay? Daniel realized with horror that he had no idea. He'd written those letters, then disappeared into his new life, never thinking about what Sarah might be going through. What if she was suffering because of what she'd done for him? What if she needed help and he'd just vanished? The guilt ate at him. He cut his trip short and came home. He tried to contact the hospital, but they couldn't give him information about Sarah due to privacy laws. They wouldn't even confirm she was his donor. He hired a private investigator. It took months, but they finally found her. Sarah Mitchell, still teaching in Portland, still living in the same apartment. Daniel wanted to rush to her immediately, but Elena, who'd become his partner by then, convinced him to wait. To think about what he wanted to say, what he wanted to offer. Because Daniel had been doing something for the last 3 years, something he needed Sarah to know about. He opened the briefcase. Inside were documents. Financial documents. Bank statements. Investment records. Daniel explained, his voice shaking, that after meeting Elena and realizing he'd never properly thanked Sarah or ensured she was taken care of, he'd made a decision. Every penny he'd earned from his book, every dollar from his pension that he didn't need for basic living expenses, every bit of money he made from the small financial consulting he did in retirement, he'd been putting into an account. An account for Sarah. For 3 years, he'd been building it, investing it carefully, growing it. The statements showed a balance of $173,000. Sarah's hands were shaking as she looked at the papers. Daniel leaned forward, desperate for her to understand. "Sarah, I know you didn't do this for money. I know you did it because you're the kind of person who sees someone suffering and acts. But I've had 10 years of life because of you. 10 years of joy and adventure and love and purpose. I found Elena because you gave me time to find her. I wrote a book I'm proud of because you gave me the years to write it. I got to see the world because you gave me the strength to explore it. And I need you to know that your sacrifice didn't just save my life. It transformed it. But here's the thing I discovered when I finally tracked you down." He pulled out another document. Medical records. He'd somehow gotten access to Sarah's health information through the private investigator, something that probably wasn't legal but that Daniel didn't care about. The records showed that Sarah had been dealing with high blood pressure for the last 5 years. That she'd had several appointments with a nephrologist. That her remaining kidney was showing signs of strain. That she'd been told she might need dialysis in the future if her kidney function continued to decline. And that she'd been struggling to pay for the specialized care she needed on a teacher's salary. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She'd been so careful to hide the health issues, even from her mother. She didn't want anyone to know because she didn't want them to say, "I told you so." Didn't want them to make her regret saving Daniel. But the truth was, her body had been paying the price for her generosity. The medical bills were crushing her. She'd taken out a second job tutoring on weekends just to keep up. She was exhausted all the time. And she was scared. Scared of ending up like her father, wasting away, buried in debt, losing everything. Daniel's voice broke as he spoke. "Sarah, this money isn't a gift. It's a debt. It's the debt I owe you for my life. And it's not enough. It'll never be enough. But I need you to take it. I need you to use it for your medical care, for whatever you need. Please. I can't enjoy the life you gave me knowing that you're suffering because of it. Please let me do this. It's not charity. It's justice." Sarah was sobbing now. She'd spent 10 years never regretting her decision, never wishing she could take it back, but also never admitting how hard it had been. How lonely it had been to carry the consequences by herself. And now this man, this stranger she'd saved, was sitting in her living room trying to save her back. She didn't know what to say. Daniel pressed a checkbook into her hands. The account was in her name. He'd already transferred everything. The money was hers, legally, irrevocably. He'd made sure of it. But that wasn't all. Daniel pulled out one more envelope. Inside was a letter from Elena. Elena had written to Sarah explaining that she'd been so moved by Sarah's story, and so grateful that Sarah had saved the man she loved, that she'd been researching Sarah's condition. As a doctor, Elena had connections. She'd found a specialist at Johns Hopkins, one of the best nephrologists in the country, who was willing to take Sarah as a patient. Elena had already arranged everything. The appointments, the travel, even a place for Sarah to stay near the hospital. All covered. All taken care of. Because Daniel and Elena both agreed that saving Sarah's health was now their mission. The same way saving Daniel had once been Sarah's. Sarah couldn't speak. She just sat there, holding these documents, these gifts, these acts of love from people who'd been strangers a decade ago. Daniel wiped his eyes and said something Sarah would never forget. "You taught me that the purpose of life is to save each other. You showed me that when you saved me. And now I get to show you. That's how it works, Sarah. We save each other. We keep each other alive. And we never, ever stop being grateful." Over the following months, Sarah's life transformed. She went to Johns Hopkins. The specialist put her on a new treatment plan that stabilized her kidney function. The financial stress that had been suffocating her evaporated. She could afford the medications, the appointments, the special diet. She could breathe again. Daniel and Elena visited her regularly. They became family. Elena, with her medical knowledge, became Sarah's advocate, making sure she got the best care possible. Daniel, with his quiet kindness, became the brother Sarah never had. They celebrated holidays together. They traveled together when Sarah felt well enough. They built a life around gratitude and mutual care. But the story doesn't end there. Because Sarah, being Sarah, couldn't just accept all this help without paying it forward. She used part of the money Daniel had given her to start a foundation. A small foundation that helped other living organ donors who were facing medical complications. She worked with Elena to create a support network, connecting donors with medical resources and financial assistance. She became an advocate, speaking at hospitals and schools about the reality of organ donation, the good and the hard, making sure people understood both the gift and the cost. Daniel's book, which had sold poorly before, got new attention when Sarah's story became public. A major publisher picked it up, and it became a bestseller. All the proceeds went to Sarah's foundation. Between Daniel's ongoing contributions and the book sales, the foundation grew. It's helped over 200 living donors in the last few years. People who saved lives and then struggled in silence. People like Sarah, who needed someone to save them back. Today, Sarah is 54 years old. Her kidney function is stable. She's healthy. She retired from teaching to run the foundation full-time. Daniel is 73, still painting badly, still writing, still traveling with Elena. They just celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary, and Sarah was the maid of honor. The three of them have become proof of something beautiful. That kindness creates more kindness. That saving someone doesn't end with the first act. It ripples outward, touching more lives, creating more connections, building something bigger than any one person. Sarah sometimes thinks about that moment 10 years ago when she decided to give her kidney to a stranger. She thinks about all the people who called her crazy. And she smiles. Because yes, it was crazy. Yes, it was risky. Yes, it cost her more than she anticipated. But it also gave her more than she ever imagined. It gave her a family. It gave her a purpose. It gave her the chance to save not just one life, but hundreds. All because she believed in a simple truth that more people need to remember. When you have the power to save someone, you use it. You don't calculate the cost or weigh the risk or wait for the perfect moment. You just act. You save them. And if you're very lucky, when you need saving yourself, someone will be there for you too. That's how humanity survives. Not through grand gestures or perfect plans, but through ordinary people doing extraordinary things for each other. Through strangers who become family. Through small acts that create big ripples. Through the simple, radical choice to care about someone else's life as much as you care about your own. So if you're watching this and you're thinking about doing something kind, something generous, something that might cost you, do it. Don't wait. Don't overthink it. Because 10 years from now, that act of kindness might come back to you in ways you never expected. It might save you when you need saving. It might create connections you never imagined. It might start something beautiful that changes not just one life, but hundreds. That's the power we all have. The power to save each other. We just have to be brave enough to use it. And when someone tries to save you back, let them. Because that's the other half of the lesson. We're not meant to be heroes alone. We're meant to save each other over and over, in an endless cycle of grace and gratitude and love. That's what makes us human. That's what makes life worth living. That's what Sarah and Daniel and Elena proved. And that's what you can prove too, if you're willing to take the risk. The next time you see someone who needs help, remember Sarah. Remember that your kindness might save more than one life. It might save your own.